It's so nice to see so many dear people, dear friends again. I don't get to see you that much, but it's been wonderful that some of you have been able to come over. In fact, quite a large crowd of you to Italy. And the life there, I wish I could come back with lots of news, but the truth is that I have been holed up in my house to the extent that whether there's snow outside or rain or wind or sun, I hardly know the difference. I never stick my nose out the door for days on end because I'm so busy writing. One morning I woke up at 2:30 and sort of meditated on my back for about an hour, hoping I'd get sleepier, but I got more and more and more awake. And finally at 3:30 I got up and started working, and until 11 o'clock at night, and didn't even get out of my pajamas. I've been really driving myself to finish the different projects because I feel that there's so much to be done, and who knows how much time to finish it in. But that last book, The Promise of Immortality, I thought, well, this book would be a nice relaxation from that, and it was for a while, but I began to feel more and more really driven to finish it quickly because it seems to me timely. With the lawsuit and all these things, it just seemed to me that I ought to give it everything I've got. And I'm happy with it. I don't suppose all of you have read it. I know that many of you have read it. But when I picked up the next project, which was a lot of sayings that I still have of masters that I hope someday to put into a book, and I began to work on it. Began means looked at 2 or 3 pages of his sayings. I thought, I can't write any more. It's been years of this driving myself to write. What was it? This Dark Eyes, this was written in 1997, wasn't it, David Miller? Are you here?
Yeah.
Was it then?
June of 97.
Yeah. What happened was that I was working on the Art as a Hidden Message, and I was in Australia, and I know that Karuna and Shoshona wanted to take me out and see the sights, and I said, I've seen enough of this planet. I don't. So I stayed there the whole time working on that book, and I came back, and David was urging me. He said, Derek's coming in August, and we've just got to have these songs for Mystic Harp too. I said, I can't think of anything. I just got to finish this book. So I got, finally, in June, I got the Art as a Hidden Message finished. Then I threw myself into that project and wrote all the music for Mystic Harp 2. Music in this case means melodies, lyrics, and some of the chords, but David did most of it. And he's really an absolute jewel to work with. He's so without ego. He just, oh, is this what you want? Fine, we'll do it. And I would like you to put this Dark Eyes to choir, you know, with chords and everything. When he first did that song that I wrote for Sarah and Nakula's wedding, you remember, Life is a Dream? And he wrote a choir piece for it. And I thought, well, it's an awfully sophisticated choir piece for such a simple song, and it took me a while to really accept it. But now I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite of all our choir pieces. So do this one too, would you, David? it can use it. But it did sound lovely as it is. The Dark Eyes, you remember that poem of Master, Dark Eyes? He called his mother Dark Eyes and Divine Mother. And so the song was inspired by that poem. I remember him saying that I've nursed you through many mothers' breasts. In this life, it was I myself. And I've always remembered that. His mother was a very special person. And more than a person. So then I dived into the Hindu way of awakening. Meanwhile, sort of had this lawsuit with Anne Bertolucci to sort of brush off while working on this book. And that was my real energy then. When I finished that, I went into the Promise of Immortality, which took me 2.5 years of work. Then after that, immediately this new book, which is about 440 pages long, not a pamphlet. And so when I was thinking about doing the next project and realized I just can't, I went out walking. David and Asha were very kind to come over and help cook while Leela was away and help me with all sorts of things that were very useful, like driving and so on. Yes, I can drive, but I really don't quite trust myself. I don't know why. I think I get too absent-minded. My mind is on all these things, and I'm likely to go up a tree. So, whereas I'm not afraid of driving. I drive perfectly well, but it's really a help to have somebody do that. And then we were out walking, and that was another way that they were useful. They said, "Come on, Swami, you've got to go out. You don't have an excuse. You've finished your book," and so on. So we went out for a walk, and we were talking about, when should I come back? I've been thinking, well, I wanted to come back this spring. Then I thought, well, if those lawyers are going to depose me for ages, which they would love to do to force us to spend money, then what's the point? If I can come back and be with you, that's one thing. If I can come back and then spend all my time being deposed, it's not worth it. But it looks as if it's going to be just fine. The subject matter is very limited. And so I thought, well, why don't I just go back with you? So we all decided on that. That's why I'm here now, as opposed to whenever it was. I just didn't even know. I'm very glad. I really wanted to come back now. And we stopped on the way. I think it's a very good thing to break that trip up. The last trip there was, it was quite a trip. When I was here before, I wasn't well. And many things weren't right with my body. I got the flu, among other things, and got on the plane to go back with the flu. Finally got to Rome, and Alan, forgive me if I tell this story on you. I got to Rome thinking, well, no problem. I mean, yes, I have 2 bags marked heavy luggage, or whatever they call them, plus a heavy shoulder strap bag, no problem, because after all, Mark and Kirtani will be out there waiting for me. All I have to do is shove the cart out there, and they'll put them in the car, and that'll be that. Well, I looked around, no Mark, no Kirtani. It was quite an experience. I don't need to let you into the whole thing. But what had happened was that I had told Mark and Kirtani I was coming back at 9:10. Alan said, no, he's coming back at 1. So they didn't come, and I didn't know that they were coming at 1. I expected them to come when I came back, which was at 9:10. In fact, I came back about 20 minutes early. So there I was with this heavy luggage. You can't leave the luggage even to go to the restroom. I mean, it would be stupid to do so. But if you can't go to the restroom, well, it's a little difficult sometimes. I tell you, it was difficult. And I was so exhausted because I wasn't well. And I decided to go up to the counter, but that meant taking an elevator. There was an elevator with a line of people in front of it. I was just too tired to face it, and I sort of went off and sat down for a while until finally I got the strength to go up and take an elevator ride. Imagine the power it takes to go up in the elevator. It's not as if you were pulling ropes. Anyway, it was all the way down that long concourse at the very end. And I got there and there was this line again. I just couldn't stand there waiting for that. So then I wanted to make a telephone call, but you know, there's no magnetism when you're tired. Instead of coming on and saying, well, look, can you help me to make a phone call? I'd lean on the counter and said, can you help me make a telephone call? No, I'm sorry, we can't. It was not a happy experience. And finally I got a man who agreed to use his calling card, because they said you need a telephone card. I didn't even know the system. I'd never used a public phone, but it seemed I had to go up the stairs to some other place. Well, I had 2 heavy bags. In fact, so heavy at one point the cart tipped over and the bag spilled over onto the floor, and I was trying to yank these things back. And fortunately, a young man saw it and came over and helped me out. But this man finally helped me to make a phone call, and I did, and got through to Assisi finally. And Alan said, oh, there's a message waiting for you upstairs on he first of all said, why don't you go to one of the lounges? Well, you have to go through customs to go to the lounges. Then he said, there's a message waiting for you at the airline counter. So I was downstairs at this time. So back to the elevator, upstairs, the long concourse. Finally, I decide I'll wait for the line. It wasn't that long this time. Finally, I got the message, please phone the office. I was willing to give somebody 50,000 lira, which is a fair amount of money for a stupid phone call. But anyway, it did all work out. I'm still here. But this is why I really would like to travel with somebody in the future. And why now I feel so much better than because I did have help coming back. Anyway, these books have been very important statements for all of us. They have been statements of what our path is all about, why we're here. Those of you who have read a place called Ananda know, but those of you who haven't, I imagine a number of you have not, it's not just a book of stories. In fact, it's very strange because I ended this book after 440 pages, ended it in the year 1970. It's not quite recent, 30 years ago, in fact. But there was nothing more to be said. You all can help tell the stories. What I needed to do was point out the principles on which Ananda was founded. And that's what this book turned out to be. I didn't know what it was going to be. In my writing, especially of recent years, I haven't a clear idea from one page to the next what I'm going to say. But Master somehow gives me the words and gives me the ideas, and I sort of sit back and say, wow, I wish I'd thought of that kind of thing. But he has the power to bless us, to guide us. Indeed, when we say, I will reason, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity, the right path in everything, it's a real prayer, and it has real results. And Ananda is the fruit of those results. And what I've said you want to give me that water there, Nalini? Thank you. What I've said in this book, thank you, yeah. What I've said in this book is, thank you, is that Master, when he was at that garden party in Beverly Hills in 1949, and he was shouting, I've never heard such a powerful talk in my life, even from him. But he was shouting with all his fervor of his heart, saying thousands of youths must go north, south, east, west, everywhere to spread this teaching. And he did not say it in that tone of voice. But I was the only one there who took that thing seriously. Maybe he was really talking to me, I don't know, but I know that on that occasion I vowed that I would do what I could to make that dream a reality. It was something I'd always wanted, even as a child, but Master gave it focus and power. And I've realized since then that he's really the patron saint in a very real way, not like a patron saint of modern television or something, no. A real power that he put into this movement. He said, I am sowing my thoughts in the ether and my words shall not die. And Ananda is the proof that they have not died. Nobody else had that dream, but thank God one person in that crowd did. Is that how these things always happen? He was appealing to thousands, but you were those thousands. You were those thousands through what little bit I've been able to bring to you of his mission, and everything that I've done in all these years has been asking him, what do you want? What would you do? And I've never been satisfied with feeling that an idea had his support or that certain things he said and did supported it and so on. I've wanted to be sure, so I've always asked or looked for things that he might have said that would contradict this guidance, because I don't want to kid myself. But again and again I've found with that approach that his power has come into this community, and it's in your eyes, it's in your lives, it's in the soil here. It's a wonderful experience for me to look back over all those years. I know that the stories I did tell were new to many of you. All those years in the 60s with the hippies and the Hare Krishna movement and the Zen Buddhist movement and this movement and that movement. Even that I only scratched the surface because I was really talking about Ananda. But I wanted to give some idea of all the different things that were going on while I was trying to find my way. Master used to sing, Sunday after Sunday, I have made thee pole star of my life. And he was my pole star. And all the way I just tried to think, what would you do? What do you want? And I looked for every opportunity that came along, that whether it would lead this way or not. I'd try some ways, they didn't look right, but they added sometimes to what I needed to know in order to continue to build this thing. But even with Bhaktivedanta, you know, when he came to San Francisco, I was there. And because he was beginning his work then, it was just a little storefront in Haight-Ashbury district. But he spoke Bengali, and I was longing to hear the Indian chanting, and so it was wonderful for me to go over there. And after we would talk Bengali, and he was sort of alone in this country with nobody knowing Bengali, so we could converse, and it was inspiring. But as I got into it, I saw that that was not really. I mean, the Vaishnavas are not noted for being philosophers, and he was not a philosopher. One day, he said to me, perhaps in an effort to win me, Ramakrishna was a fool. I said, Swamiji, what are you saying? I said, why do you say that? He worshipped the Divine Mother, Kali. He didn't worship Krishna. I said, but he found God through Krishna too. Oh yes, I didn't know that. Ananda Ma was a fool. I said, she's always chanting to Krishna if that's what you want. He said, oh, I didn't know that. And I didn't want to argue with him, so I just bowed and left and never went back. But that dogmatism, I understand that at the end of his life, he himself, just a day before he died, said that he realized he'd been mistaken, he'd been too narrow, too bigoted in his approach. And in fact, he told Allen Ginsberg, who was one of the people I got to meet then too. Mind you, I didn't know any of these scenes. I was I'd been living in a monastery ever since I was 22. One time, while giving a lecture in Hollywood Church, I said that something about boogie woogie. And somebody afterwards said, "Didn't you know that it isn't boogie woogie anymore?" I said, "Oh no, what is it?" "Rock and roll." I said, "Gee, how long has this been going on?" And she said, "Well, rock and roll's been popular for 5 years. I'd never even heard of it." So that shows how completely out of it I was living in the monastery there. And so all the hippie scene and the psychedelic drug scene and so on, I wasn't a part of any of it. But still, because I became known as a yoga teacher and yoga was in, I became one of the, I won't say leading lights, but leading voices anyway, of that era. And it was with Allen Ginsberg and Richard Baker, who became the Roshi at the Zen temple, and Gary Snyder, and Richard Wertheimer was their lawyer, but they all came up here to see the land at the seclusion retreat, and I came with them just because I had met Dick Baker in a store. And I'd heard him talking about this wonderful land deal, and I'd been looking for land for a place of seclusion, to start a retreat if possible, a community if possible. And so anyway, they brought me along with them, but I was certainly an outsider to them, as I was to all these other groups. And I just never sort of fitted in. This was where I can fit in. But those scenes were things that I sort of watched and observed and learned from what I could, but it wasn't my scene. And so Allen Ginsberg, anyway, later used to come and sit with me in my dome when I lived over there and talk about things. And he said to me that Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta, had said to him, "Where did I go wrong?" And so he knew there was something wrong. See, he had the idea that all you need to do is sing Hare Krishna, the Maha Mantra, and you'll be saved. You can be any kind of person you want, but you'll be saved. This is the belief. But it's not just that. I remember a story of Ramakrishna when he said, I believe, that he was an incarnation of Chaitanya, who was the founder of the Vaishnava movement in its present form anyway. But they went to a Vaishnava meeting, and that it was a very dispirited affair. Just chanting alone won't do it. Master said it's half the battle, but the other half is devotion, real devotion, not dancing sort of like an American Indian in a war dance, as they were doing here, and not even the gracefulness of India. You know, every morning when I lived in the ashram in Baranagar, outside Calcutta, a group of Vaishnavas would come by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. It was beautiful. It was thrilling. But that's not enough. You've got to have a change inwardly. You've got to have, in fact, some philosophy. You have to know what you're really seeking. And what you're seeking is not somebody who's blue and plays a flute. You're seeking an infinite consciousness. You're a part of that consciousness. This is the truth that Master brought to us. And the wonderful thing is that as I look back over his life, I'm absolutely amazed to see how much he tuned in to all the different, you might say, schools and of philosophy and so on, East and West, and made it clear. For example, he talked about Buddhism. He said Buddhism lost when people understood from Buddha that there is no God. What happened was that people in the old times were so dependent on the gods that all they did was different ceremonies that would give them a beautiful wife or a good husband or a good job or make them powerful or have many children, or all worldly ideas. And Buddha didn't want people thinking that way. They wanted them to understand the self within. So when they talked about God, he didn't answer. Not that there isn't a God, but that God is you. And people weren't sophisticated enough to understand that, so when he didn't answer, they said, well, there is no God. That's why so many people today are drawn to Buddhism, because modern philosophy is always trying to teach you how to achieve perfection without God. Well, Master pointed out that there is indeed a point of nirvana, which is where there is absolute nothingness. Rajarshi describes that state, where he seemed to have absolutely nothing left, and he was just in a state of, he didn't know. But he just clung to this little point of light here. And then after 3 days of that, gradually that light began to come closer and closer and closer, and suddenly he saw Christ, and behind Christ, Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, Sri Yukteswar, Master, and he merged into Master's light, and then he attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But what the Buddha experienced was the same. When he was sitting there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he said, I will not move from this spot until I've solved the mystery of life. And finally all the demons of Satan came and tried to lure him with sex and money and power and everything. And he just knocked on the ground. He said, Mara, Satan, I have conquered you. And they all disappeared, and then all of a sudden, he saw the infinite. Well, at that point, what I read when I was in Thailand, when I first went there in '58, was an official tract of Buddhism that said that yes, it's true, you get a little bliss in the beginning, but after that, there's nothing. Oh, that's why they don't work so hard. I mean, they all work to get good karma. Who wants to be reborn as a spider, I guess. But the thing is that they're all for just sort of delaying the last moment of nothingness. Who wouldn't? And so they keep wanting to come back here. But Buddha didn't talk about that. Buddha talked about the, well, I remember Master was helping us at the lake shrine, and we had a statue of Buddha that we wanted to set. And somebody said, where would you like the Buddha to sit, sir? Master was standing there. Master, with a little smile, said, the Buddha prefers to remain standing. But he was the Buddha. All liberated great masters are the Buddha. The Buddha is the enlightened one. And this is what he helped us to see, that the message of Buddha was no different from the message of the Vedas, very different from the message people were taking from the Vedas, but the realization that that infinite one is your reality, it's who you are. And so people began saying, and Buddhists began saying, there is no God because Buddha says there's no God. Well, that isn't what Buddha said. There's nothing in his writings that says there is no God. Yes, there's a lot in his writings saying don't bother about the gods. That's different. But then Shankaracharya came, and he is, I think, one of our line. At any rate, he said, yes, there's a God, but he's not a being. You can't call him Krishna or Kali or Vishnu or Brahma or Shiva. No. He is Satchidanandam. And that means literally existence, consciousness, bliss, but what it meant was ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy, as Master explained it. And so God is not a form, God is formless. But people in those days were still not very enlightened. And so in saying that God is formless, they began to think absolutely abstractly. And there was no longer in the minds of many Hindus that God is just without form, right, but not anything you can relate to yourself. You're going into something totally abstract. And so Ramanuja came, and made it clear that the soul cannot ever die, as the Gita says. The soul continues, and as an individual too. And this was a little hard for people to understand when Chaitanya came and talked devotion. That was a very necessary message at that time, because religion had been going a little bit too much toward abstraction. But you see, the masters don't come and give you the absolute. They give you what's needed right then. Jesus ate meat, at least according to the Bible, and I'd say why not? Because he was fitting into the mores of his times. He couldn't give people, if he had been a strict vegetarian, that's all we'd know of Christianity. So strange that we might as well just talk about that. But in the Hindu line, Master came along. Ramakrishna also came to show that all these paths lead to God. Master came to show how they lead. That the Vasishtha Advaita, this is one of the most wonderful things in the Gita. And if I have a project, you've got to believe that I'd love to redo the Gita. It's too hard to read as it is. I think if they have a difficult way of putting something, they'll bung it in. If they've got a long word, they'll throw it in. Anything to show their own erudition, but it doesn't enlighten the poor reader who by the page 3 is already asleep. Dr. Peter called it the best substitute for a sleeping pill. Literary substitute for a sleeping pill. But I'd love to do that, because I was with Master when he did that. I read the manuscript. It was so easy to read, so exciting. I said to him, just with excitement in my heart, I said, "Sir, this is much better than the lessons." And he said, "Well, it has the lessons have the techniques." That's all. He knew it was better. But is it better? No, I can't read it. I'd love to try to work on that. That's one of the things that, if God spares me, I'll be 75 this year. It's pushing it. But I think I can hang in there a little bit longer. We're doing pretty well, aren't we, Gandhi? I think so. You know, she's an old woman. She's 3 months older than I am. God, how ancient can you get? And so what Master did was show that all of these teachings were right. That yes, you can't say that God is something separate from you. Yes, God is an infinite consciousness, and the Atman is the same. But that doesn't mean, and this is a point that he really, in his Gita writings, brought in, that the soul never loses anything in God, not even its individuality. That's an astounding statement. Nobody's ever made that before. Ramanuja did it to some extent, but it wasn't clear. Master made it clear. And I don't say Master therefore was the greatest. That's what followers of Ramakrishna have done. They say, he's the first one who said that all are one, therefore he's the greatest. Well, that's not very logical, surely, is it? What Master did was that none of the masters do it from themselves. God does it through them. But Master came at a time when God was ready to help people to understand this, because they were more sophisticated intellectually than they were centuries ago. Now it is time to explain. But the point is that even in God, where, let's say, John so-and-so realizes that he's nothing except God, that God became himself, he never loses the memory of having been that soul, John, through all those incarnations. That always remains in eternity. And that memory separates him to that extent from that oneness which he has achieved. So it's not as if it ever gets crowded up there with everybody getting realized. It's really that you just realize the truth that everything is God. It's all He. But at the same time you've had this particular experience for all these lifetimes. Nobody will ever be able to repeat it. Maybe everybody has to be a banker at some time, and a lawyer at some time, and a pirate at some time, and so on. Maybe, probably. But nobody will be the same kind of banker or the same kind of lawyer, thank God, or the same... Everybody will be himself. Now this is why it's so important. This is why I was saying that, you know, when I was saying this in Palo Alto, when David Frawley, you all know who he is, and he said to me once that I've been in probably all the different ashrams in this country. He said, the only ashram that I see continuing after the founder's death is Ananda, because you have not tried to do it all yourself. You've delegated to other people the authority to do. Our belief is that decisions should be made as close to a grassroots level as possible. And it's from that, everybody becoming empowered with that, that Ananda will continue to grow. Because Kriyananda is just not, it's not that he doesn't have his place, but he also knows how to keep his place. He doesn't try to thrust himself, he tries to get you going and doing this. There's another thing. When I was a teenager and thinking about communities, and it seemed to me, first of all, that cities are really a disease. Gandhi said it, and you see it. People living in the cities, they develop tensions and emotional anxieties and loneliness and all sorts of negative emotions that are not natural to human beings. To live closer to nature, to live in small communities is natural. And I know in India people would ask me, what village do you come from? We never ask people that. We don't even know villages. Everybody in India virtually was born in a village. Less so now, of course, because there are these bigger cities, but that's the norm in history too. But then I was thinking, yes, small communities are a wonderful answer, but on the other hand, you have gossip and judgment and all those qualities that make small town living and small community living so petty. And I thought, how can I create a community that won't have that negative aspect? And I realized the way was to join people together in an ideal. Basically, you can say the reason we don't have that here, minimally, is because we're all trying to find perfection. And when you're busy trying to perfect yourself, you can't worry about other people's mistakes. You just know that we've all got things to work with. We're all trying to reach the same goal. It's going to take time for all of us. There is a much greater, in fact, it's a wonderful sense of acceptance, of all embraciveness that we've found in Ananda communities. And with that, the communities movement can grow. Otherwise, it would become just little enclaves of pettiness. That's not the answer. But when people come together, each one wanting to work on himself. So Ananda is a community, yes, but not walking in lockstep togetherness. That's why one of our theme songs has always been, walk like a man. Even though you walk alone, why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all stay home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. And Ananda is composed of many, many individuals who are not told. I remember once in SRF, Daya was talking to me about her idea that everything needs to be centered. And I said, yes, I can see that, but I think it needs to be balanced also with decentralization. And she said, the board thinks differently. Don't you think you ought to go along with the board? Well, I was on the board. I was the first vice president. For her to say this to me meant that nobody had a right to think at all, even the members of the board. Well, that I don't think is the way to build this work. master, and this is the other side of what he did. In the beginning, in the Hindu tradition, he showed how all the Indian teachings are summed up in the simple words: self-realization, fellowship. Self-realization, realization of the self within, fellowship with God, and with God in all truth-seeking souls. And through all that, you see that all the masters taught that. They just tried to fine-tune it according to the needs of their own times. None is greater than any other. One time I was with him, and he said that those who achieved final liberation were Babaji, in the autobiography, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, Swami Paramananda, the saint with two bodies, and Ram Gopal Muzumdar. And he didn't mention himself, but he'd said that on other occasions. He just didn't want to intrude his ego on that, which he didn't have. But so I said to him, well, what about this one and that one and the other? No. Then he mentioned one. He said, nearly, but not yet. And I mentioned, then he said, yes, but I did meet one fully liberated saint. I didn't mention him in the autobiography, but Sri Rama Yogi, who was a disciple of Ramana Maharshi, but more advanced than Ramana Maharshi. And I was surprised that the disciple could be more advanced than the guru. He said it can happen. Once you're there, you don't really care. Once you've reached the stage of Jivan Mukta, then you have no more present karma that you can get because there's no ego. And if you have past karma, you may just use this as an excuse to bring you back and help your disciples, that's all. And so on that level, all the saints of modern times really would be placed. That state of freedom is not an easy thing to get, obviously, but it's not very often that you find one. They're still great masters. To be a Jivan Mukta is something, he said, we all should expect. We should all work to become Jivan Muktas. Param Muktas, completely liberated, that's another deal. But to reach the stage where you have no sense of ego, where God does everything through you, this is what the state of Jivan Mukta is. You can't get new karma because there's no I operating. And so you come back, and in fact, another very fascinating thing in Master's Gita interpretations is that an advanced yogi may incarnate simultaneously in several bodies at once, just to get rid of his karma. It's a very strange picture once you get into the inner workings. And the state of Jivan Mukta means that you're reliving. Master said in one meditation you can work out the karma of an entire lifetime in vision. What you see is these different things that you thought you were doing and realize God was doing it. I had an interesting encounter with an opera singer. She came to me from France, and she was American, however, but she sang alto, and because she was alto, she always had to sing the part of the heavy feminine role, the villainess. And she was asking me, how can I keep this consciousness of God's presence while singing a villainous role? And I said that, why don't you just think of that as a past life? That you're watching it just like a Jivan Mukta, watching the different things that that person has to do, and then releasing it into God. And she said, well, I'm glad to be authenticated by what you say, because that is what I do. And many people have told me, after my singing a role of some villainous person, that they've been inspired. I said, that's right, that's what you should do. We should find in the experience of the past, not that they pull us down, but the realization, I didn't do that. It was done through this particular form. And then when you see that it was God that was doing it, and you release it back into Him, there's no karma left. And so, bit by bit, that karma becomes worked out, and then you become completely free. Complete freedom is a very, very rare thing in this world. But Rajarshi had it, and Sister Gyanamata had it, so it's not impossible. Here in the West, however, it's not. I was astounded to see that Master, who was no scholar, still, in his talking about the different trends in Christianity and so on, he resolved, consciously or unconsciously, I don't know, God did it through him, he resolved all the dilemmas of Christian theology. The main one was that Jesus, the Aryan philosophy, that Jesus was a man, not God. Well, Master explained that he was both. This is the concept of the avatara, in fact, that a great soul, a liberated soul, the Star of Bethlehem? Whether there was any star up there, I don't know, but I really can't see how it's possible, because if you see a star over a building and you go behind that building, it's over another building. I'm certain this is what it was all about, and that's what Master said too, that the star in the spiritual eye, when you can go through that star, you realize God the Father beyond creation. It's a sign when they said we have seen His star. What they meant was that the divine, from that highest level, had incarnated in this little form. And so the wise men came to do him honor in that form, knowing that he was an avatara. But this state of absolute freedom did not mean that he wasn't human. And this is the difficult thing. It's difficult for all of us. I know I was with Master, and he was talking to a group of us, and I was trying to puzzle this thing out. You can't really understand it. You can't puzzle it out, but I was trying. And so I was thinking, now he's not there, he's here. I was trying to think of him here. Right then he came over and gave me an apple, looked very understandingly into my eyes. What he was saying was that I'm both. You don't have to eliminate one to create the other. That's what a lot of the early Gnostics did. They were trying to say that Jesus was not a man, but he was a man also. And so this was one of the dilemmas that Master helped to resolve, to the extent that a thing of that nature can be resolved. And then the whole early church, Master said he had been sent. Mind you, no master comes out of his own decision. I will do this. I think it's a good idea. I want to do that. No. They do it because God wants it. And God told him through Babaji, through Lahiri Mahashaya in a sense, and directly also through Swami Kriyananda, to bring this Christian message to the West. That Jesus said to Babaji, what has happened to my church? They're doing good works, but they've forgotten communion. And Master he said, I will send you someone to bring this message of yoga and of Kriya Yoga, not just Kriya Yoga, this deeper understanding of what it's all about, to the West. And Master told us many times in public that I was sent here to bring back original Christianity. He said that Christ was crucified once, but his teachings have been crucified daily for 2,000 years. This message of inner communion, of self-realization, is what he came to bring. And it's an interesting thing, and you'll enjoy, if you have not yet read, the last chapter of my book, A Place Called Ananda, because I go into all of that and show how what happened in the early church, they were sinking deeper and deeper into Kali Yuga, and people's consciousness was all form. And with that consciousness of form, they wanted forms, formal religion, formal expression, formalized dogmas. They wanted it all fixed, and they wanted people in charge who could control the dissemination of it for fear of some false teaching coming out. The wonderful thing in India is that it's so totally disorganized. There isn't really any, they don't have a talent for working together. In America, we do have that talent, and even so, to start a community has not been an easy thing. I know in the early period, I only had to open my mouth for everybody to leap into it. So it seemed to me, just outraged at this thought or that thought. Like I remember I was down there earning the money to pay the mortgage so that we could live here and not have it snapped out from under us. And I came up here one time to give a talk to the people, and they were all very happy to hear a spiritual talk. But what I did was talk to them about the need to get behind this thing and support it, get jobs, find some kind of work. Well, they didn't want that. They wanted to live for God. That meant going down to the Yuba River and swimming. And they said, God will take care of us. Why do you want to be so materialistic? And so to them, I was the justification for their definition of a life for God. I was taking care of them. Didn't that show that God would take care of them? It was not all that easy in the beginning. But bit by bit, people began to realize this is something worth defending. I think the lawsuit is helping in that respect too, that we understand more than ever how precious this thing is. Where would our lives be without it? I myself, looking around me every morning, I think, thank God for Ananda. Thank God for all of you. Thank God for the opportunity to live in company with others and walk in company with others and seek the truth with them. In the world, it's awfully hard to hold those ideals. In the world, in fact, what happens is that people are so, they're so pulled down by Maya that they think that they're doing a good thing if they are good neighbors to one another. That's not enough. And so Master, with his teaching, he was really, see, the early church persecuted the early Christians. And that's how Master said that Christ's teachings have been crucified. The early church crucified those people who wanted it themselves, wanted to find God themselves, wanted self-realization, because they wanted it all under control for fear that one person would go this way or that way. I talked of India being disorganized, but what's wonderful about India is that because they don't have an official church, everybody has the freedom to find the truth and the highest level of truth that he wants. And so you find in India, although you find a lot of nonsense and a lot of dilution and betrayal of the teachings and so on, you find great souls also. Individuals who love God, who seek God, who are not told by some confessor that you've got to do it this way or that way. Saint Teresa of Avila said that people have no idea what harm is done by priests who try to counsel them without having any experience themselves. Who, for instance, they told her, don't go into silence, that's not good, you've got to say the prayers. And so for years she kept trying to say these prayers until finally she realized she couldn't. There was some power that held her mind so she couldn't even pray. And then she wrote later that this was the fourth stage of real prayer, when you can't pray. Or as Master said in his poem, Prayer at Eventide, oh, how maddening! I can pray no more with words, but only with wistful yearning of my soul. This is what we need to come to go beyond prayer. But a priest won't want you. He's sort of wanting to hold on to you. And if you slip away too far, he'll pull you back. That's what organized religion does. That's why the church persecuted the Gnostics. And of course, the only thing we read now about the Gnostics is what the enemies of Gnosticism wrote. So they'll put in all the wrong things that they said. But there were great souls then too. Origen, he was the greatest theologian before St. Augustine. He said that he got this teaching of reincarnation in a direct line from the apostles. But it's an inconvenient thing. It's much easier to say that if you don't do what I say, you'll go to hell, and you'll burn, and you'll suffer, and you'll do it for all eternity. My God, one lifetime seems eternal. Think of a real eternity. But can a finite cause produce an infinite effect? Ridiculous. There's no reason to it. But they succeeded all the same in killing the Gnostics. It's only in recent years that people have found at Nag Hammadi and elsewhere the teachings, a few of the teachings of the Gnostics that were buried, and they've discovered how very individual religion is also, and there's some nonsense among it. But what Master came to bring back, and I'd say if you really want to know what the Gnostics taught, don't go to scholars who have been reading these dusty scripts. Master explained it. The Christianity, the original Christianity that he came to bring. Mind you, Jesus was not a Christian. St. Paul was the first Christian. Jesus came to bring Judaism back. He said it again and again. He said, I came not to betray the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. He was a true Jew. Modern Jews are not true Jews. Modern Christians are not true Christians. The masters have to keep getting sent back again and again to bring their minds back to truths that are eternal. There's no difference between Judaism and Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism. It's all one. Or, as a friend of ours in South Carolina where I stopped, he said, we're all one. We had a very sweet visit there. But you know, one other thing, they took me out to a place that they were building. And you can't create anything with a building. It's magnetism. This is another dimension of the teaching that people are more important than things. I pointed out to them, look, this place was in better shape. You're bringing it back to make it in good shape, hoping people will come. Why should they come? I said the government put up this thing as a recreation center. The reason that it was closed was because nobody came. They're not going to come to a building. They're certainly not going to come to a building in the middle of nowhere, which is what that place is. Miles and miles, and you finally see a house here or there. That's not the way to draw people. I said, why don't you start a radio program? Why don't you help these people to understand that religion is different from spirituality? That spirituality is something even an atheist can have. If he loves other people, if he's kind, if he's truthful, this is what spirituality is, what it's about. And I urged them, and she calls herself my cousin, she may be, I don't know, her last name's Walters, but her father did look rather like my father, so I'm not sure, but I'm willing to go along with it. She's a very fine person, very intelligent, very full of energy, very intuitive, and I'd like to give her all the energy I can. But I said, look, I can't do this. I'm committed to a particular guru, to a particular path. I said, however, there is a real need for instance, if you have a radio program, you can invite ministers from the different churches. You can interview them and try to bring them to an agreement that what we're really teaching finally is principles, ways of living, ways of behaving. And if we can do that I don't really see, when Master said he saw thousands of communities and saw the community movement spreading like wildfire, I don't see that enough people will be his disciples in your lifetime, what to speak of mine, to make it spreading like wildfire in that way. But I said this to Michael Gornick when he came to Ananda Assisi, and I said it to Linda Walters too. Look, there are other ways that we can take at least the essence of this teaching, that we don't have to do it always one way. But if we can somehow help people to get to know themselves and their relationship with God, then maybe people of many different persuasions will come. One thing I've said, however, in again my last chapter, which I have to say is a bombshell, but it says a lot of things that will not be popular in certain quarters, which shall not be mentioned. However, the principle of, what was I going to say? Come on, Jeannie, tell me what I was going to say.
What you said in the last chapter in the book.
About the different karmas being transcended, I think is what
Yes, is that all? That's the trouble with never preparing. You don't have notes to go through. But what I was saying was that in this oneness, there have to be many different ways. We have to accept that. But there's one point that I've mentioned, and this I said, and it's not what I was going to say, but it's worth saying, that Master is really the patron saint of this movement. And those who tune into him, I can say it with incredible conviction, that when Rajarsi said to me, Master has a great work to do through you, which Master had already told me, and he said, he will give you the power, the strength to do it. And I've seen that to be true. Not only the strength to survive against onslaughts, but the understanding, the intuition. I've known, I don't know why, but I've always known whether a thing was right or wrong. And often I've tested the waters, just given them a chance, but I've just known. Now that's not from me. Like a very interesting thing, Master said to me, after I'm gone, the men must live in a separate colony from the women. And what puzzled me no end was that he said it only to me. I wasn't running the show, I was in charge of the monks, but I wasn't in charge of the work. He didn't say it to Dayamata or all the women there. Why did he say it to me? And then another thing that puzzled me even more was that Mr. Cuaron, who was our center leader in Mexico City, said to me, Master told me yesterday, today, I don't remember which it was, that he saw me in a building on the corner of the property here at Mount Washington, on the corner of Rome Drive and San Rafael Avenue, which in fact is where, years later, the monks' ashram was built. And I've thought, well then, why did he say that to Cuaron? Know that the monks' ashram would be there, not tell the women that he wanted the monks separate, know that they wouldn't be separated. Why did he tell me? And I used to wonder about this, but it's often happened that I don't get answers until somebody asks me. And David Praver asked me, well, why did he do that? So then I thought, well, I'd better ask Master. So I asked Master, and instantly I understood. Master was saying, I wanted you separate. And so it has been. I could not have done anything if I hadn't been separated. This is what Ananda's mission is. Not a nice community, yes, that's beautiful, but much, much more. Ananda's mission is to bring back original Christianity, not churchianity. Why did he give his organization the name Self-Realization Fellowship? That very ideal which is being betrayed by the organization in its attempt to make people not think. Like Tara said to me, in a corporation, in an organization, no one has a right even to think, except the members of the board of directors. And when I was a board member, I discovered that even then I didn't have the right to think. That's not self-realization. Self-realization is between you and God. Master said to us once, you have to individually make love to God. He said, it's not just living here that will do it. He said, there are plenty of rats and mice in the canyon on this property. They're not advancing spiritually. They're not finding God. So people who come here and live here and just play the organ, and they're not going to find God. You have to individually. The organization won't do it for you. That was what he was saying. But that's what Ananda encourages. It encourages each one. We're a bunch of eccentrics here. Because each one is himself, and we encourage that. So the beauty of Ananda is not just that it's a lovely place to live and that the people here are harmonious. We're under the guidance of a great master, yes. But much more than that. We are, our lives, the purpose of what we're doing is to bring back that original Christianity of our contact with God. And it's your conscience, and no one will ever know God the way you will know God when you know Him. No one in all eternity. Because your relationship with Him is unique. People who say, I want to be me, they're not me at all. Watch them coming out of a Western movie, sort of walking bow-legged. They take on the influences of other people. And that's why people in America behave in one way, and in Italy in another way, and in India another way. But inside, we're all the same. One thing it's always been a nice thing for me to hear is that wherever I go, people feel that I belong to them. I do feel that way. But that's because I don't feel I'm there. Master's there. Let's all live in that spirit. If we do, this ideal will spread, and it won't spread necessarily in the same way. It shouldn't. Too many Anandas would be a confusion, I think. But lots of communities inspired by Ananda, communities that we don't even know exist, still, they've taken this model and used it in their way. The one thing I hope I've left with them, above everything else, is that if they tune in to this great master, they'll find guidance coming, they'll find understanding of how to do things. And I think that's been the failure of a lot, that they haven't had this inner guidance. They're all trying to do a good thing, but too much of it is I want. The beautiful thing at Ananda, and why our meetings are almost always harmonious, is because we don't want anything except God's will. And God doesn't want anything, He wants truth. He wants your own growth. The more we can live in the thought that we only want to please God, I only think, what would Master do? What would Master say? And with that guidance, you will find that long after I'm gone, this spirit can continue. And remember one more thing, it does come from inside, but it needs the human touch too. It has to be something that is passed down so that you receive it, others will receive it from you. There is a spiritual touch there that is very important. With those two, you can't fail. So I've come back here, having written all this stuff which is inspiring to me. It's not like automatic writing. Yes, I feel Master has written it through me. Ideas come to me that are I've never heard before, and yet I know they're right, and I know they're His. But at the same time, to hold the line of willpower to that inspiration, to get it to the point where it's simple, clear, understandable, and not misunderstandable, all of this takes a great deal of work. And so having reached the point where I simply couldn't face that book, I thought, well, I've wanted to come here anyway, this is the best time. So I'm so glad to be with you, and I want to do more resting than I did last year. Last year was very, very intense, not only because of my physical health, but I really wanted to give everything I could. This time I don't feel that sense of urgency, but I want to be able to be with you in a more relaxed way, and share with you in a more relaxed way, and just embrace you all in God, because we're all really one in Him. Anyway, God bless you.